The cold wind howled through the dark alley as Ryan walked home from his late-night shift. The streets were empty, except for the occasional flickering streetlight. He adjusted his jacket, trying to ignore the eerie silence around him. Then he saw her. A girl stood near a dumpster, shivering. But something was wrong. Her skin was pale blue, and her silver eyes glowed faintly in the darkness. Her long white hair fell over her shoulders, and she clutched her arms as if she were freezing. Ryan stopped. Was this a prank? A costume? But as he stepped closer, he realized she was real. The girl looked up, fear in her glowing eyes. She took a step back, pressing herself against the wall. "Hey, are you okay?" Ryan asked carefully. She opened her mouth but didn't speak. Her breathing was uneven, and her hands trembled. Ryan noticed a deep scratch on her arm. Blood, dark blue, dripped onto the ground. "You're hurt," he said, taking another step. She flinched. Her body tensed as if she expected him to attack. Ryan slowly removed his jacket and held it out. "I won't hurt you," he said. "You look cold." The girl hesitated, her silver eyes locked onto his. Then, cautiously, she reached out and took the jacket. Her fingers brushed against his, and Ryan felt a strange, electric sensation run through him. "Can you understand me?" he asked. She nodded slowly. "Yes," she whispered, her voice soft and uncertain. Ryan exhaled in relief. "What's your name?" She hesitated again before answering. "Elara." "Elara," he repeated. It was a beautiful but unfamiliar name. "Where are you from?" Elara lowered her gaze. "Far away." Ryan had 100 questions, but he could see she was exhausted and scared. The most important thing now was to help her. "You need somewhere safe," he said. "Come with me." Elara looked at him for a long moment. Then, slowly, she nodded. Ryan didn't know what he was getting himself into, but one thing was certain. This was just the beginning. The alien girl, weak and starving, looked at the human with wide, uncertain eyes. She had never seen someone like him before. His skin was smooth, his eyes were kind, and his movements were careful. He had given her food. No one had ever done that before. She hesitated before taking another bite of the strange but delicious food. Warmth spread through her body, something she had not felt in days. The human, noticing her slow movements, sat down nearby, giving her space. "You must have been really hungry," he said softly. His voice was calm, not threatening. The alien girl did not answer. She didn't know if she could trust him. But her body betrayed her fear, and she ate quickly. The man watched in silence. He had so many questions. Where had she come from? What had happened to her? But he didn't want to scare her, so he stayed quiet. After finishing the food, the alien girl finally spoke, her voice weak. "Why did you help me?" The human shrugged. "You looked like you needed help." She stared at him. In her world, help was never free. There was always a price. But this human, he was different. For a moment, silence filled the air. The wind blew gently, rustling the leaves around them. The girl felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Safety. "What's your name?" the human asked. She hesitated. Could she trust him with her name? After a moment, she whispered, "Cinna." The man smiled. "Nice to meet you, Cinna. I'm Daniel." Cinna lowered her gaze. A name. He had given her his name. That meant he didn't see her as a threat. Daniel stood up and stretched. "You shouldn't stay here. It's not safe." Cinna tensed. Was he going to take her somewhere? Should she run? But she had no energy left. Daniel noticed her fear. He sighed. "I won't force you, but if you need a place to rest, my house is nearby." He pointed toward the trees. "It's warm. Safe." Cinna looked at the direction he pointed. Could she really trust him? But what other choice did she have? The cold nights would kill her. After a long pause, she gave a small nod. Daniel smiled. All right, let's go. But don't worry, no one will hurt you. Cinna didn't reply, but deep inside, a tiny hope sparked within her. Maybe, just maybe, this human was different. The alien girl, Lariah, sat across from Daniel in his small but cozy home. Her bright violet eyes flickered between him and the steaming bowl of food he had placed in front of her. The scent filled the air, making her tense shoulders relax slightly. "You can eat," Daniel said with a small smile, pushing the bowl closer. "It's just soup. Won't hurt you." Lariah hesitated. She had never eaten human food before. Her people had different dietary needs, but right now, hunger gnawed at her stomach. Carefully, she picked up the spoon, awkwardly at first, her fingers trembling, and took a small sip. Her eyes widened. Warmth spread through her body, a comfort she hadn't felt in a long time. She took another sip, then another, faster this time. Daniel chuckled. "Slow down, he'll choke." She paused, looking at him. "This is good." Her voice was softer now, less guarded. "Glad you like it," Daniel said. "You looked like you hadn't eaten in days." Lariah lowered her gaze. She had been running for so long, hiding from those who hunted her. She had trusted no one. Yet here was this human, offering her food, shelter, kindness. "Why? Why are you helping me?" she asked suddenly. Daniel leaned back in his chair. "Because you needed help." His expression was calm, sincere. "And because it's the right thing to do." Lariah stared at him. In her world, kindness like this was rare. Everything was about power, control, survival. But this human, he was different. A sudden noise outside made her flinch. Her body tensed, ready to run. Daniel noticed. "Relax," he said. "It's just the wind." But Lariah wasn't sure. She had a feeling someone was looking for her, and if they found her here, Daniel could be in danger too. She set the spoon down, her heart pounding. I can't stay," she whispered. "They'll come for me." Daniel frowned. Who? She hesitated. Could she trust him? He had saved her, fed her, but if she told him the truth, would he turn her in? Before she could decide, there was a sharp knock on the door. Lariah froze. Daniel stood up, his expression serious. He glanced at her, then at the door. "Stay here," he whispered, moving toward it. Lariah's breath caught in her throat. If this was who she thought it was, everything was about to change. The night was cold, and the wind howled through the trees. Jason sat near the small fire, watching the alien girl, Zayla, as she rested. She was still weak, but at least she was safe now. Her strange silver eyes glowed softly in the firelight, and her dark blue skin looked almost human under the flickering flames. Jason had given her his jacket earlier, and she had wrapped it tightly around herself. She still didn't trust him completely, but there was something different in her eyes now. Less fear, more curiosity. "You're not like the others," she finally said, her voice quiet but firm. Jason raised an eyebrow. "Others? The humans I've seen before. They are not kind." Jason sighed. "Yeah, I get it. Not everyone is nice, but not all humans are bad, either." Zayla looked down, her sharp claws tracing patterns in the dirt. "Then why are you helping me?" Jason poked at the fire with a stick, thinking for a moment. "Because you needed help. And because I don't like seeing someone suffer when I can do something about it." Zayla tilted her head, her silver eyes studying him carefully. "That is unusual." Jason chuckled. "For humans, maybe, but I think kindness isn't just a human thing. Don't your people help each other?" Zayla hesitated before answering. "We do, but only our own kind. Outsiders are enemies." Jason frowned. "That's a hard way to live." She nodded, looking away. "It is." A moment of silence passed between them, broken only by the crackling of the fire. Then suddenly, a sharp sound came from the darkness, a branch snapping. Zayla's body tensed, and Jason immediately grabbed his knife. his heart pounding. "Stay here," he whispered. She shook her head. "No, if they found me, we must run." Jason didn't argue. He quickly kicked dirt over the fire, putting it out, and grabbed Zila's hand. She flinched at first, but didn't pull away. They moved quickly through the trees, their footsteps barely making a sound. Jason's mind raced. Who was after her? More of her kind. Someone else. He didn't know, but one thing was certain. He wasn't going to let them take her. Zela squeezed his hand suddenly, stopping him. "This way," she whispered, leading him toward a rocky cliffside. Jason followed, his breath quick and his pulse racing. Whatever was hunting them, it was getting. The alien girl, Silna, sat quietly in the dimly lit room, her glowing violet eyes fixed on the human in front of her. David, who had saved her from starvation, was busy preparing a simple meal in his small kitchen. The sound of sizzling food filled the air, and the warm aroma made her stomach growl. "You really eat this every day?" Silna asked, her voice carrying a mix of curiosity and disbelief. David chuckled. "Not every day, but yeah, pretty often. It's nothing fancy, but it keeps me going." Silna watched as he placed a steaming plate in front of her. She hesitated for a moment before picking up a piece of the food and taking a cautious bite. Her eyes widened slightly. It wasn't bad. Different, but not bad. David smiled. "Not so terrible, right?" She gave a small nod. "It's edible." As they ate, Silna kept glancing at him, as if trying to figure him out. Humans were strange creatures. She had expected him to demand something from her in return for his kindness, yet he hadn't asked for anything. "You risked a lot for me," she said suddenly, breaking the silence. "Why?" David leaned back in his chair, thinking for a moment. "I don't know. It just felt like the right thing to do." Silna frowned. "That's not an answer." David sighed. "Look, I know what it's like to struggle, to feel like no one cares. I've been there. When I saw you like that, I couldn't just walk away." Silna stared at him, her expression unreadable. "You're different from what I expected humans to be." David raised an eyebrow. "And what did you expect?" She hesitated. "Selfish, uncaring, dangerous." David smirked. "Wow, you had really low expectations of us." Silna let out a small laugh, the first real one since they had met. It was soft, almost musical, and it surprised even her. But before the moment could last, a sudden noise outside made her tense. Her sharp ears picked up distant voices, unfamiliar, searching. "They're looking for me," she whispered, her body going rigid. David immediately stood up, his expression turning serious. "Then we need to get out of here. Now." Silna looked at him, surprised. "You'd run with me." David grabbed his jacket and tossed her a cloak to cover herself. "I didn't save you just to let them take you back. Come on." For the first time in a long while, Silna felt something she thought she had lost. Hope. Without another word, they slipped into the darkness, running towards an uncertain future together. The alien girl sat near the fire, her glowing eyes reflecting the flickering flames. She was still weak, but her body was healing. The human had given her food, water, and shelter, things she never thought she would receive from his kind. She watched him quietly as he prepared more food. The way he moved, so naturally and without fear, fascinated her. "You don't have to do all this," she said softly. The human looked up and smiled. "I know, but I want to." She lowered her gaze. In her world, kindness was rare. Most species only took what they wanted. But this human was different. He had no reason to help her, yet he did. A cool breeze passed through the cave entrance, making her shiver. The human noticed and grabbed a spare blanket, placing it over her shoulders. "Here," he said, "this should help." She hesitated before pulling the blanket tighter around her. It was warm, carrying his scent, strange, yet oddly comforting. "You're not afraid of me?" she asked suddenly. The human chuckled. "Should I be? She thought for a moment. Back home, she was considered dangerous. But here, she was weak, vulnerable. He could have left her to die. But instead, he saved her. No, she finally answered. You shouldn't. There was silence between them for a while, only the sound of crackling wood filling the cave. Then she spoke again, her voice softer this time. Why do you help me? The human poked at the fire with a stick. Because it's the right thing to do. She frowned. Even if I'm not human. He nodded. Doesn't matter. You needed help. That's enough for me. She stared at him, searching for any sign of deception. But there was none. He meant every word. A strange feeling grew inside her chest, something unfamiliar. Trust. For the first time in a long while, she felt safe. Outside, the wind howled, but inside the cave, it was warm. And for the first time, the alien girl allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't alone anymore. The alien girl, weak and trembling, stared at the human in disbelief. She had never met anyone like him before. He didn't hesitate to share his food, despite having so little for himself. Her people had always warned her about humans, selfish, dangerous, and untrustworthy. But this one was different. She hesitated for a moment, then picked up the small piece of bread he had given her. It was dry and rough, but to her starving body, it felt like the most delicious thing in the world. She took a slow bite, her sharp teeth sinking into the soft part of the bread. The human watched her carefully, noticing how she ate with small, careful movements. He could tell she was starving, but she still tried to eat with dignity. What's your name? He asked suddenly. The alien girl stopped chewing. She looked at him, her glowing eyes filled with caution. Then, after a moment, she whispered, Zyra. He smiled. Zyra, that's a nice name. I'm Liam. Zyra nodded, repeating the name in her mind. Liam, a human name. A kind human. As she finished the last bite, her body relaxed a little. For the first time in days, her stomach didn't feel like an empty void. She looked at Liam again, as if seeing him in a new light. Why? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Liam raised an eyebrow. Why what? Why did you help me? He chuckled softly and leaned back against the wall. Because you needed help. Zyra frowned. Your kind. They don't usually help mine. Liam sighed, running a hand through his messy hair. Maybe that's true, but I'm not like everyone else. And I don't think you are either. For a moment, there was only silence between them. The wind howled outside, and the dim light from the fire flickered against the cold walls of the abandoned building they were hiding in. Zyra studied Liam's face. He looked tired, like he had been through a lot himself. She wanted to ask more questions but wasn't sure if she should. Then, suddenly, footsteps echoed outside. Heavy, metallic footsteps. Liam tensed. Zyra's eyes widened in fear. They're coming, she whispered. Liam grabbed his backpack and quickly put out the fire. Can you run? He asked. Zyra nodded, even though her legs still felt weak. Then let's go, Liam said firmly. Without another word, they slipped out through the back door, disappearing into the shadows. The hunt wasn't over yet. But for the first time, Zyra wasn't alone. The alien girl sat quietly, her glowing eyes fixed on the human who had changed everything for her. She had never expected kindness from his kind, never thought a human would risk so much just for her. Yet, here he was, standing beside her, despite all the danger. You should leave, she whispered, her voice trembling. They will come for me soon. The human shook his head. I'm not leaving you. His voice was firm, determined. We started this together, and we'll finish it together. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed in the distance. The alien girl's heart pounded. They had been found. The human grabbed her hand and pulled her behind cover. Trust me, he said softly. For a moment, she hesitated. Trust was not something her kind gave easily. But looking into his eyes, she saw something she had never seen before, complete sincerity. The enemies arrived, their weapons drawn. "Come out," a voice demanded. The human took a deep breath, then stepped forward. "You don't have to do this," he said. "She's not your enemy. She just wants to live in peace." The alien soldiers hesitated. They had been taught that humans were dangerous, selfish creatures. But this one was different. "Step aside, human," one of them ordered. "No," he said firmly. "If you take her, you'll have to take me too." Silence filled the air. Then, slowly, the leader lowered his weapon. "Go," he said, "before I change my mind." The alien girl couldn't believe it. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The leader looked at the human. "Because maybe not all humans are bad." With that, they turned and left. The alien girl exhaled in relief, her body still trembling. She looked at the human, emotions swirling inside her. "You saved me," she whispered. He smiled. "I just did what was right." For the first time in her life, she felt hope. Maybe, just maybe, the universe was not as cruel as she had once believed. She reached out, taking his hand in hers. "Thank you." He squeezed her hand gently. "Always." As they walked away together, she knew one thing for sure. This human had changed her life forever. The air inside the alien spaceship was cold, almost lifeless. The human, Daniel, stood in the center of the dimly lit chamber, his heart pounding. Across from him, the alien girl, Syra, looked at him with a mixture of desperation and hope. Her glowing violet eyes flickered as she clutched the strange device in her hands. This is my last chance," she whispered. Daniel frowned. "What do you mean?" Syra hesitated, then sighed. "The others, they won't accept me back. My people believe I betrayed them by trusting a human." Daniel clenched his fists. "That's not fair. You helped me. You saved me." She gave a sad smile. "They won't care. But maybe there's another way." Before Daniel could ask, the spaceship suddenly shook. A deep mechanical voice echoed through the room. "Intruder detected. Surrender immediately." Daniel and Sarah exchanged a look. There was no time to argue. "Run," she shouted, pulling him towards a hidden corridor. The walls hummed as the ship's security systems activated. Red lights flashed, and metallic doors started closing one by one. Daniel ran as fast as he could, but behind them, robotic sentinels emerged from the walls. Their glowing red eyes locked onto him. "Stop, human." A burst of energy shot past Daniel's shoulder. He ducked, feeling the heat against his skin. Syra turned and raised her device, pressing a button. The high-pitched noise filled the air, and the robots twitched violently before shutting down. Daniel stared at her. "You could do that the whole time." Syra smirked. "I was saving it for a real emergency." Another explosion rocked the ship. Syra's eyes widened. "They're destroying the ship. We have to get out." "But how?" Daniel asked. She hesitated, then looked at him. "Do you trust me?" Daniel didn't even think. He nodded. Syra grabbed his hand and sprinted towards a large, circular door. She slammed her palm against a scanner, and the door hissed open, revealing the small escape pod. "In here," she urged. Daniel jumped in, and Syra followed. The door shut just as another explosion tore through the ship. The pod launched, shaking violently as it shot through space. Daniel barely managed to hold onto his seat. Outside the window, he saw the alien ship collapsing, pieces of metal scattering into the void. Sarah exhaled in relief. "We made it." Daniel grinned. "Yeah, but now what?" She looked at him, her eyes shining. "Now we find a new beginning." And with that, their journey truly began. As the last rays of the setting sun illuminated the sky, Maya stood by the window, looking out into the distance. The past few days had been a whirlwind of emotions, each moment more intense than the last. Her thoughts were a jumble, and she couldn't help but replay every conversation, every glance, and every unspoken word that had passed between her and the human. He had been so different from anyone she had ever met. While others saw her as an alien, a creature from another world, he saw her as someone worthy of trust and care. He didn't treat her as a tool or a prize to be won. No, he had seen her for who she truly was, a person with feelings, dreams, and desires. She let out a long, heavy sigh. Her heart was torn in two. She had never felt such warmth in the presence of another being, especially not from someone so different. But her mission, her duty, it was all so complicated. Maya knew that if she stayed with him, it would mean leaving behind everything she had ever known. Her people, her home, her family. Could she truly choose him over everything else? Her mind wandered back to the moment they had shared earlier that day. His smile, so kind and genuine, had been the thing that had held her attention. His laughter had felt like music to her ears, and when he looked at her, there was a tenderness that melted away her doubts, even if only for a moment. Maya turned away from the window and paced the room. The decision was looming, and the weight of it was almost too much to bear. She could feel the pressure of her own emotions, the weight of her people's expectations, and the fear of the unknown. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized something she had never truly acknowledged before. There was a strength in her that she hadn't recognized. She wasn't just an alien. She wasn't just a soldier or a diplomat. She was an individual with the power to choose her own path, to create her own future. Her heart raced as the realization hit her. She had the power to decide. And in this moment, she knew what she had to do. With newfound clarity, Maya walked toward the door. She knew that she couldn't stay hidden any longer. It was time to face the human. She needed to tell him everything, to be honest with him about her fears, her hopes, and the truth of who she was. She was no longer willing to live in the shadows of doubt and uncertainty. As she stepped into the corridor, the sound of her footsteps echoed through the empty hall. She didn't know what the future would hold, but for the first time in a long while, she felt ready to face it, ready to embrace whatever came next. And when she reached him, she would tell him the truth, and together, they would figure out what to do next, no matter how uncertain it might be.